To further discuss the controversy surrounding the MLB's boycott of Georgia's new election law, I want to welcome President of the Job Creators Network, Alfredo Ortiz, to the program. Hi, Alfredo. Thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So first off, I want to get into it, but can you just give our viewers a very brief explanation of what your organization does? What is the overall goal?
Yeah, absolutely. Advocacy of small business. Job Creators Network has been around for about 10 years now, and really advocating for all of our small businesses across the country. Here in the Peach State, for example, with everything going on, we've been a critical voice in that. But across the country, 30 million small businesses need a voice, and that's what we do. And we've been involved in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. We're involved in the development of the Paycheck Protection Program, and now really involved on defending small businesses across some of the stuff that Joe Biden has proposed, like the increase in the minimum wage, the increase in taxes and regulations and whatnot, which are really going to hurt our small businesses. And so that's what Job Creators Network is all about.
All right, and one of the main concerns that critics of the MLB's decision that I just mentioned to pull its All-Star game from Atlanta is that small businesses are the ones that are taking the biggest hit from all of this. So based on your work, how many businesses would you say are feeling the financial impact of this?
Yeah, well, there are about 1 million small businesses in the state of Georgia, and the estimated impact to them is about $100 million is what's been estimated. And, we all famously remember what Obama said about elections have consequences. Well, so do lies, Jennifer. In this particular case, those lies are costing our small business owners $100 million. And when I reference the lies, it's what has been spun, especially by Stacey Abrams, regarding the Georgia voting law that was signed into law just about a week or so ago by Governor Kemp. And it really is a shame because, a lot of these political pundits and operatives, I kind of expect them to spin these lies, but the CEOs, I always hold them to a higher standard, especially of our publicly traded companies. And it just seems in this particular case, people jumped on the bandwagon, and the MLB in particular, I think, pulled the trigger way too early without really doing their homework in terms of what the voting law in Georgia really was about.
When you say lies, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so when you look, for example, at the voter ID issue, how it was going to, hurt people because they weren't going to be able to access voting because of that. That really isn't true. There are about 35 states that have voter ID laws. And in many cases, those states, in fact, even Denver, for example, where the MLB moved the game to, they have stricter voting law requirements in many cases and actually less days of voting than Georgia just instituted. And so, the list goes on from that perspective. But again, the bigger concern is that the due diligence, I think, in this particular case wasn't probably done the way it should have been. And again, we hold our CEOs, I think, and other corporations to much higher standards, I think, than we do our politicians, which is probably a shame as well. But in this particular case, again, $100 million is the economic damages to our small businesses in the Peach State. And that's something that is really, really terrible, especially after the very difficult 2020 year with COVID and all the lockdowns that had to happen. And many of these businesses, in particular in the state of Georgia, that are being impacted in Cobb County are minority-owned small businesses, and that really is damaging to them.
Well, and you mentioned politicians, so I want to get your take on this. Senator Mitch McConnell, just a couple of days ago, he warned businesses to stay out of politics and essentially said that their campaign contributions are welcome, but just not their opinions. Then a day after, he softened his stance, of course. Do you think businesses should be withholding campaign contributions from politicians like McConnell who make these types of comments?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. I mean, I think the way we look at it is, we love it if CEOs educate their employees on issues that impact their pocketbooks and their pocketbooks day in and day out. But we want to make sure that those CEOs educate their employees with the facts and not necessarily have opinions about those facts, but let the employees decide one way or another what they're going to do with those facts, so that way they can have just a very straightforward conversation with their employees about these different policies. And I think, again, this is a wonderful country where not everybody's going to agree on stuff, and I think that's the beauty of our freedom of speech here. But again, let's make sure that the facts are presented as facts and not mispresented as facts, because I think this was the biggest issue that really led to the MLB pullout, was the presentation of myths as facts.
All right, and then finally, President Biden continues to call the changes in Georgia Jim Crow laws. That's how he's been describing them. He says that it's reassuring to him to see businesses speaking up about this, but then at the same time, he admits that these boycotts are hurting low-income earners, especially like you mentioned. Do you think that he should be taking a hardline stance one way or the other?
Well, I think he should take into account the $100 million of economic damages to our minority small business owners here in the Peach State. I mean, these are the very folks that Stacey Abrams and Joe Biden supposedly are concerned about. But in a recent poll that the Atlanta Journal-Constitution did of voters, 75% of voters, for example, supported the voter ID. 2/3 of black voters supported voter ID, and 90%, that's 90 of voters polled, supported, made less than $25,000, supported voter ID laws. And so from that perspective, the folks and people here in the state of Georgia really did support the voter ID aspect of that. And so I think we need to take those things in consideration. But again, we got to be careful about these kinds of lies or myths, whatever people want to call it, because they do have consequences. And again, in this particular case, the consequences was $100 million of lost revenues to many of these minority-owned small businesses that desperately needed this kind of income to make up for the horrific 2020 that they had. I'm concerned that, frankly, we may not have these businesses. Some of these businesses may be reevaluating their very existence at this point because of it.
Right, and we're still in the middle of the pandemic. And just a quick follow-up before I let you go. This $100 million that you're speaking about is just directly tied to the All-Star game this year, or how is that dollar amount?
Yeah, no, the commissioners and folks in the Cobb County area estimated the $100 million impact. And if you think about it, it makes sense. I mean, from all the tourism revenues, if you think of the hotels, the Uber and Lyft rides across the from the airports to the hotels back and forth. I mean, everything related to servicing that big of a game. And when you look at past All-Star games, that's about right. The impact has been to those cities somewhere between 60 to 80 to $90 million. And so given a lot of the pent-up demand, I think that's out there for travel and just for entertainment. The $100 million estimate that Cobb County estimated, that's not much of a stretch from my perspective.
All right. Very interesting. Alfredo Ortiz, president of the Job Creators Network, speaking with OAN about the MLB Georgia boycott in response to these laws. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.